This episode is sponsored by NordVPN. Wouldn't it be cool if we could actually see evolution as it's happening? We can sometimes spot where a new species has recently diverged from a nearby population, like how the London Underground now has its own type of mosquito that split off from its topside neighbors. And maybe certain adaptations can even hint at the future, like when a mostly solitary bee species starts to show signs of queen and worker behavior. But it would be an especially powerful tool if we could look at a single beast before and after a major evolutionary change to learn exactly how adaptations happen. And maybe we can, with this little tropical fish that somehow becomes this fish over and over again. The Bizarre Beast Pin Club is open for subscriptions for the whole month. Sign up by November 20th, and the first pin you will get will be an absolutely gorgeous set of tetras. The Mexican tetra, Astyonex mexicanus, lives in freshwater streams and pools from Mexico up into the southern United States. These fish grow to an average of 7.5 centimeters long and have a tendency to school, sometimes pretty densely. They're apparently great aquarium fish too, but these tetras also live in cave systems in at least 29 separate places in Mexico, which is where things get interesting. They eat worms, insects, and crustaceans above ground, but will settle for whatever scraps come their way underground. And that's the key to making a seemingly ordinary beast bizarre. The lack of food and light inside of caves has resulted in the Mexican tetra evolving an extremely distinctive cave morph, or variant form. The surface-dwelling normal morph of the Mexican tetra has some simple pigmentation, nothing quite as flashy as other tetra species, but clearly there, and functioning eyes, like, fish tend to have. The cave morph, meanwhile, has no pigment and anywhere from minimal eye function to virtually no eyes at all. Plus, their other senses are all heightened in the absence of sight. Yet, despite such dramatic differences in how they look, the two morphs are still the same tetra species. Some cave and surface populations even continue to interbreed. Weirder still, the cave flavor evolved from the original recipe multiple times independently. So, what makes these two morphs so different if they're still related enough to be the same species? Well, many studies have tried to find the answer, and one of the main outcomes has been that it apparently doesn't take much. For example, a couple of small tweaks to blood circulation in the head could mean the difference between having eyes and not. The fact is that these fish have repeatedly made their way into cave systems, then convergently evolved a cave morph in each one, which means that they may be able to help us solve some major evolutionary puzzles. So, to really sort this one species multiple versions business, we need to zoom out, because we've encountered distinct variations within the same species before, just not quite like this. The explanation here has to do with the unique challenges of moving into a cave, and what that can mean for future generations born there. The creatures that live in the world's remotest depths tend to be some of the strangest. It's just as true for caves as it is for the bottom of the ocean. Inside of a cave, it's really dark, as in absolutely dark, as in your eyes will never adjust because there is no light. Dark. And a complete absence of light usually means no primary production to form the base of the food chain. Plants simply can't hang. As a result, all food energy in this ecosystem has to come from outside of the cave. To survive here, animals need to minimize their energy consumption and maximize their food-finding abilities. That's why your typical cave critters tend to have slow metabolisms, exaggerated sensory organs, and a lack of traits that would have only helped their surface-dwelling ancestors. Eyes and pigment? Cave tetras don't have time for that surface nonsense. That said, if you don't use it, you lose it isn't biologically speaking quite enough to make whole eyeballs vanish. But loss of color can be at least partially attributed to a lack of use due to a phenomenon called genetic drift. The relative abundance of certain gene variants in a population can naturally ebb and flow totally by chance from generation to generation. This usually just averages out over time. But in small enough populations, like, say, Mexican tetras inside a cave, this natural fluctuation may be big enough to mean randomly losing an entire variant between generations. So the assorted shades of dull that make up the color palette of the cave morphs can be chalked up to random change, especially because there are no grave consequences to not staying the same color as the surface morph. Ditching the eyeballs, on the other hand, is much more likely due to straightforward natural selection. In caves, there's a strong advantage for mutations that lead to eye loss, because eyes use up a lot of energy, as much as 15% of a baby tetra's overall metabolic output. Energy conservation is a real winner underground, so eyes quickly become an obvious loser. And there's a name for the phenomenon of species losing complex traits over time: regressive evolution. These apparent evolutionary steps backwards can be seen all over the place in nature too. Just ask any snake about its legs. Regressive evolutionary changes can happen a few different ways, including genetic drift and active selection against unhelpful traits. This all at least covers the why of the Mexican tetra's cave makeover. The how is what's so puzzling, though. What actual mechanism can explain outright losing complex body parts, even when there is a clear evolutionary advantage to it? And how can the results still be the same species? Just to add one final wrinkle, genetic signs point to the cave populations of the Mexican tetra having independently developed very recently, like within the last 20,000 years or so. Okay, so first off, many of the genes responsible for cave-style tetras happen to just be really big, meaning that they're simply easier targets for mutations to hit. It's just a much longer stretch of DNA in which stuff can happen. This could help explain both the speed of the changes and the fact that the same types of convergent traits keep happening. The genes that lead to the tetra's cave morph were already the most likely to change in the first place. And to illustrate how subtle these genetic differences can be, one experiment found that breeding cave morph tetras from two different caves can produce tetras with normal eyes. Because each population of cave tetras changed different parts of the same genes, the two parents' genetic contributions effectively canceled out each other's mutations. But even before mutations, these beasts might have already had many of the tools they needed for cavification. Scientists mimicked the environmental stress effects that the Mexican tetra might experience upon suddenly finding itself in a cave environment, including shutting down some molecular regulators. The result was tetra offspring with way more variation in eye size than in the surface population. The wider range in size of eyes after only a couple of generations would make natural selection for smaller eyes both easier and faster than if all the fish still had the large eyes of their surface peers. In other words, evolutionary changes like these don't have to happen just because of brand new mutations, but instead can partially be explained by genetic variation that was already there, and just invisible without the cave context. And plenty of evolutionary changes similar to the surface to cave shift in the Mexican tetra have been observed in other species. But experiments like these allow us to see just how fine the line can actually be from one form to another, and to empirically test different ways of causing those changes. Maybe gaining or losing major features is a lot easier to do than we might have guessed. Which brings us back to that idea of regressive evolution. The name makes sense on the surface. A complicated characteristic develops over millions of years, so that same trait going away again certainly seems like a reversal. But it's worth stressing that evolution has no direction or goal. It's just what we call the resulting process of these changes over time. So an eye-free adaptation to living in total darkness is still an adaptation. No need to qualify what direction it's taking things. Some researchers have recently suggested even getting rid of the regressive distinction outright. But backwards, forwards, or any which way you want to look at them, the Mexican tetra isn't shy about showing us how amazing and bizarre its adaptations are, even when they can't look back at us. Sign up for the Pin Club at bizarrebeshow.com and help us keep this channel going. If you want a tetra to be your first pin, sign up by November 20th. We'd like to thank the National Geographic Photo Arc for letting us use their images in this episode. And now for some bonus facts. Adapting to cave life doesn't stop at just looking different. The Mexican tetra cave morph acts differently too. For example, finding food in the dark relies on totally different senses than doing so in the light. So cave tetras react to and approach any movement they detect in the water in ways that surface fish don't bother with. Young fish also attack potential prey much less precisely than they might out in the light, opting to aim for a bigger target to maximize their chances of catching what they're aiming for. We also mentioned earlier that the Mexican tetra often forms large schools, but this is not so true for their cave morph. Schooling in fish is largely a predator avoidance tactic, but because there isn't as much to hide from in a cave, there's less use for this behavior. And multiple fish species have been observed schooling less when food is more scarce, which certainly tracks for the cave environment. Another notable behavioral difference between surface and cave morph is sleep. How does that work for a fish that's in total darkness all the time? Turns out, they just do it less. A lot less. Scientists think that this may be an adaptation to maximize the amount of time they can spend foraging, since it isn't connected to differences involving the lack of a day-night cycle. That cycle, also called a circadian rhythm, is conserved across lots of species of animals and plants, and it's convergently disrupted in very similar ways for all sorts of species that have moved underground. That means that the Mexican tetra's cave morph has a very similar schedule to our old friend the naked mole rat. It's just another one of the many things that makes life underground bizarre. The Mexican tetra shows us how radically species sometimes have to change to adapt to new conditions. Today, the internet can feel like a new ecosystem filled with challenges we're not equipped to navigate. Enter NordVPN. Whether it's for security, anonymity, accessing restricted content, or getting better deals, NordVPN helps you adapt to life online with ease. For example, if I were to go to Mexico to find some tetras, but don't want to miss my shows, I can use NordVPN to switch servers so I can watch all of the shows from any country. With NordVPN, your internet data stays safe behind next-generation encryption, and their threat protection features guard against malicious sites, downloads, trackers, and intrusive ads. Plus, with thousands of servers globally, you can enjoy the internet without limits. Their strict no-logs policy ensures your private data is never tracked, collected, or compromised. Go to nordvpn.com/bizarrebeasts for an exclusive deal and try it risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Once again, that's nordvpn.com/bizarrebeasts for a big discount and 4 months free.